I bought a gently used Delta 46-460 Midi lathe, and I love it. And I spent a weekend putting this workstation together. In this video, I'm going to cover some of the details for that. And the purpose of this is to see what you think and to see if you have some additional suggestions to make this workstation even better. Well, hello everybody, it's Jimmy and welcome back to my shop here in Stuart, Florida. Back in November, I gave my lathe away. I had a Ridgid bar style lathe, and I had that for about 3 years, and it served me well, and I did many projects on it. But as I used that machine, there were some features that I really wanted in a lathe, and so I shopped and decided to get a Midi. So this is a Delta 46-460 Midi. I picked this up coincidentally through our wood turning guild here in Florida, and one of the members had this available and I picked it up. I paid about half the retail price for it. It's a 2011 model, but she's lightly used and she works just fine. So I actually shut down operations here for a couple of days to put together this workstation, and the purpose of this video is for me to kind of go over some of the features of my workstation, decisions I wanted to make. And my goal here is to get your critiques and comments and any suggestions you have for further improving the station. So with that, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll share some of the things that I did with this workstation. Well, the first problem with this new lathe was that it was mounted on its original metal stand, and so it was just the lathe and its stand, and the stand had actually been shortened somewhat for the gentleman that owned it before I did, and the spindle center line came up to about my belt. So I needed to get this thing up about 6 to 9 inches thereabouts to get that spindle right around my elbow level. So to do that, I separated the top from the base. I've got a 2x4 in between the fasteners here. It's also on a 2x plank here that I set the lathe itself on. And in addition to that, I set the frame on this 4x4, which is further elevated by this wheel that I installed so that I can move it around. Whenever possible, and I'm doing a lot of heavy turning, I will take the lathe and I'll wheel it outside. I've got a roll-up door here, and I like to have a wheel on the lathe so I can just pick this end up and kind of move it like a barbecue grill. It's really not that heavy. The weight of this thing is mainly over the wheel. It probably takes about 15 to 20 pounds of force, maybe 25 pounds of force to pick it up. But it's quite stable, and I love being able to move it around, so that was a feature that I had to have. I mounted the lathe itself onto this white board, and funny story on the board here, I go to yard sales pretty much every weekend, and the gentleman that I got this piece of wood from was a sign painter. So he had this nice white slab. It's a nice finished piece. This is some type of enamel. It's even been routed on the edges here, and it sat in my shop for about 5 years waiting for something to come along, and that something was this lathe, and it's actually very perfect. I left myself a little room on the headstock end for little pieces that go with the headstock, and then on this side I left myself a little overhang so that I can pull the headstock off and have a place to set it. It's been very convenient. I drilled several holes around the periphery of this, and as I'm working, it gives me a place to put things so that they don't fall. Like just for example, now this is not where I would normally keep it, but you just put this in here like this, and it's handy and it's stable. So it's not going to go anywhere while I'm working. I found that I really needed to have 2 different size holes. Here on the headstock side, I've got 3/4 inch holes, and that's good for the screw drive and the spur drive, and but it's too small for the Novichok key here, so that needed to be a 1 inch, and a lot of my other pieces need a 1 inch hole. Now I put holes on the back side for my tool holder that's not in use. That needed a 1 inch hole, 3/4 wasn't going to get it. And then I've got my chuck here, and then I've got a cup center here for the tailstock. And so my strategy was that I wanted sharp stuff to be away from where I'm working. So that's why I put this here. I tend to leave these Forstners hooked up, and I can't tell you how many times I've cut myself on those. Now for my lighting, I just have a desk lamp here, and you just clamp this onto the board. But I find this to be a little bit unwieldy. This is kind of in the way, and this is really kind of large. And you put it over the work, and you can feel the heat from it. So I think I want to get rid of this, and I want to go with a couple of the little gooseneck LEDs. They're about that big. They put a tremendous amount of light out. Now on my other lathe, I had eyelets on the back of all my tools like I have for these here, and I hung them on cup hooks off the edge of the work surface there. And that was really very inconvenient, and the reason is this: I wear bifocals, and at this distance you have a hard time figuring out what the tools are. So you're at this distance where you're not in focus, and it's kind of dark down there, and so it was always a pain to try to figure out which tool was which. So I put some of my lesser used items down here, and what I've done is I've created a tool rack up here for the ones that I use the most. Now this tool rack is just a couple of pieces of wood with holes. I think these are 1 1/4, and holes on the bottom, and so there's 2 levels to this, and I've got 7 holes for my most commonly used tools, and then I've got some holes for my detailing tools. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tools here, and then I have 4 holes for these little homemade screwdriver tools, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've got 11 cutters right up here. And I have to say, this is really a good location for this, because I can reach right over with my right hand. I can see what I've got here, and it's very obvious what I need. It's really a big efficiency improvement over what I had. I put some cup hooks here, and I've got my outside calipers, inside calipers, and a good old paintbrush for cleaning here. What else? Here's a depth gauge. I need to do something better for that, but it fits in there very nicely. One of my constant problems was mislocating my chuck key. And so I finally realized that I needed to put a leash on this thing. So I just have a piece of string here. I just tied it on here, and I just stick it in the hole here that's for the bed extension, and it's right where I need it. The chuck is always right here on the headstock, and so it's within a foot or so of where I'm going to use it, and it doesn't travel very far. And so I'm really glad I did this. Now the string, safety wise, I was a little bit worried about using anything more than that, because God forbid it should get tangled on the work while it's rotating. The string should fail before it causes a big problem. Down below the table, I've got some tools that I use less frequently. Like here's a box scraper, and there's some other detailing tools there. There's my go no-go for tenons, and the cutoff tool. There's just not a good convenient place to put those up top. Well, I enjoyed giving you this little tour, and I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you'll leave me a comment or two and tell me what you think. Have a great day.